Elena Marsh stood frozen in the hallway of her own home, staring at a phone screen that was not hers to hold. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through messages that made her stomach twist into a hard knot. Daniel, her husband of 9 years, had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered, and something inside her, some quiet warning she had been ignoring for months, told her to pick it up. She wished she had not. The messages were from a woman named Priya. They were not simple. They were intimate, filled with plans for a future that did not include Elena. There were photographs. There were words like, "our baby," and "when we finally live together," and "I can't wait to tell everyone." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She read the words 3 times, 4 times, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less painful, something that made sense in a way that did not shatter her world. They did not. Elena Marsh was 34 years old. She had spent nearly a decade of her life building a home, a marriage, a partnership she believed was strong enough to survive anything. She had given up a promising career in interior design to support Daniel as he climbed the ranks at his architecture firm. She had managed their finances, hosted his colleagues for dinner, driven 3 hours to be at his side when his father passed away, and stood beside him through every hard season without complaint. She had believed, with the kind of certainty that only comes from years of trust, that Daniel loved her the way she loved him. Now, standing in the hallway with his phone burning in her palm, she understood that belief had been a lie she told herself. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled out into the hallway, and Daniel appeared in a towel, rubbing a second towel through his damp hair. He saw the phone in her hand before he saw her face, and something shifted in his expression. A flicker of panic quickly replaced by something colder, something Elena had never seen from him before. "Give that to me," he said, his voice flat. Elena did not move. "Who is Priya?" Daniel's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, and in that silence, Elena felt the last 9 years of her life crumbling beneath her feet. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no apology, no shame, only irritation, as if she were the one who had done something wrong. "You shouldn't have gone through my phone." "Who is Priya?" Elena repeated, louder this time, her voice cracking, despite her effort to stay composed. Daniel ran a hand through his wet hair and looked away from her, toward the window, toward anything that was not her face. "She's someone I've been seeing," he said finally, "for a while now." The words landed like physical blows. Elena felt her knees weaken, and she reached for the wall to steady herself. A while now. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, but something ongoing, something built in the shadows of their marriage, while she had been folding his laundry, and remembering his coffee order, and defending him to her own family, when they questioned how much of herself she was giving up. "How long?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" "How long, Daniel?" He exhaled sharply, the sound of a man annoyed at being questioned, rather than a man facing the consequences of his choices. "A year. Maybe a little more." A year. Elena did the math without meaning to. A year ago, she had planned a surprise trip for their anniversary. A year ago, she had cried in his arms after a difficult miscarriage, one of 3 they had endured together, or so she had thought. A year ago, he had told her he loved her more than anything in the world, and she had believed him completely. She looked at the phone in her hand again, at the messages still glowing on the screen, and she felt something inside her go very still and very quiet. It was the stillness that comes right before a storm, the calm that the body creates to protect itself from feeling too much at once. "She's pregnant," Elena said. It was not a question. She had read the words herself. Daniel's silence was answer enough. Elena set the phone down carefully on the hallway table, as if it were something fragile, something that might shatter if she moved too quickly. In truth, it was her own composure she was trying to protect, not the device. She turned to face her husband fully, searching his face for some sign of remorse, some flicker of the man she had married, the man who used to leave notes in her coat pockets and dance with her in the kitchen for no reason at all. She did not find him. "How could you do this?" she asked, and her voice, to her own surprise, remained steady. "How could you build a whole life with someone else, while pretending everything was fine with me?" Daniel's expression hardened further, and for the first time, Elena saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than the affair itself. It was not guilt, it was resentment, as though he believed himself to be the wronged party in this moment, as though her discovery of his betrayal was the true offense. "Things haven't been right between us for a long time," he said. "You know that. You've been so wrapped up in everything else, you stopped seeing me. Priya sees me." Elena felt her chest tighten. She thought of every late night she had waited up for him with dinner going cold. Every business trip she had never questioned. Every excuse she had accepted without complaint, because she trusted him completely. She thought of the version of herself who had shrunk smaller and smaller over the years, to make more room for his ambitions, his moods, his needs, believing that was what love required. "So this is my fault," she said quietly. "You built a secret life with another woman, and somehow this is my fault." Daniel did not answer directly. Instead, he walked past her into the bedroom, pulling clothes from the closet with quick, agitated movements, as though he needed to be doing something with his hands. Elena followed him, her mind racing, trying to make sense of a reality that refused to hold still. "What happens now?" she asked, though part of her already feared the answer. "I don't know," Daniel said, not looking at her. "I need to think." "You need to think," Elena repeated, disbelief coloring her tone. "Daniel, you have a child coming with another woman. There is nothing to think about. Either you tell me the truth about what you want, or I need to know so I can decide what I want." He finally turned to look at her, and for a brief moment, something like sadness crossed his face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same cold determination she had seen earlier. "I think I need some space," he said. "I think maybe it's best if you stay somewhere else for a few days. Let me sort things out." Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and say this was some cruel joke, that none of it was real. But Daniel simply continued dressing, as though he had not just asked his wife of 9 years to leave her own home, so he could have space to consider his mistress and their unborn child. "This is my house too," Elena said, her voice rising for the first time. "I have put everything into this life, into this marriage. You don't get to just push me out, because it's convenient for you." "I'm not pushing you out," Daniel said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I just need some time to figure out what I actually want." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. Not yet. Not while he stood there so calm, so unbothered by the wreckage he had created. She turned and walked out of the bedroom, down the hallway, past the family photographs that lined the wall, photographs of vacations, and holidays, and a life she had believed was solid. She spent that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last several years of her marriage, searching for the moment things had gone wrong. Had there been signs she missed? Nights he came home smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume, explained away as a crowded elevator or a colleague's office. Weekends he claimed were spent at conferences, though she had never questioned the details. A new habit of locking his phone, something he had never done before. She had noticed these things in fragments, small inconsistencies that never quite added up to a full picture, and she had chosen, again and again, to believe the simpler explanation, because the alternative was too painful to consider. Now, lying in the dark, she understood that ignorance had not protected her. It had only delayed this moment, made the eventual collision more devastating. In the days that followed, Daniel grew distant in a way that felt deliberate, almost cruel. He came home late and left early. He spoke to her only when necessary, his words clipped and businesslike, as though she were a colleague he tolerated, rather than a wife he had once claimed to love completely. Elena tried, at first, to salvage some conversation between them, to understand what he truly wanted, but each attempt was met with vague answers and impatient sighs. She began to notice other things too, a suitcase missing from the closet, certain personal items disappearing from the bathroom, a new contact saved in his phone under a name that was clearly not what it appeared to be. It became increasingly obvious that Daniel was not taking time to reconsider his choices. He was preparing to leave, and he was doing so while allowing Elena to remain in a painful limbo, uncertain of her own future. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the discovery, Elena came home from visiting her sister, to find several boxes stacked neatly by the front door. Her name was written on each one in Daniel's handwriting. Confused and alarmed, she called out for him, and he emerged from the study, his expression carefully neutral. "What is this?" she asked, gesturing at the boxes. "I packed some of your things," he said. "I thought it might be easier if you had somewhere else to stay while we figure this out." Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. "You packed my things? Without asking me?" "I didn't want this to drag on," Daniel said, his tone suggesting he believed himself to be acting reasonably, even kindly. "It's better for everyone if we're clear about where things stand." "Where things stand," Elena echoed. "You mean where you stand? With her?" Daniel did not deny it. He simply looked at her, waiting for her to accept what he had already decided, as though her feelings, her home, her entire life, were details to be managed, rather than a person to be considered. Elena felt something shift inside her in that moment, a small but significant crack in the wall of shock and confusion that had surrounded her since the discovery. Beneath the hurt, beneath the disbelief, she felt the first spark of something else: anger. Not the explosive, chaotic kind, but a quiet, burning anger that settled deep in her chest and refused to be extinguished. She looked at the boxes with her name on them, at the home she had built now being dismantled around her, and she made a decision. She would not beg, she would not plead with a man who had already chosen someone else, who had already begun erasing her from the life they had shared. Whatever came next, she would meet it with her head held high, even if her heart was breaking with every step. "Fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll stay with my sister. But Daniel, understand this. What you're doing to me right now, the way you're treating me, I will never forget it. And one day, you will understand exactly what you threw away." Daniel said nothing. He simply turned and walked back toward the study, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Elena standing alone among boxes that contained the remnants of a life she no longer recognized as her own. That night, as she loaded her car with the boxes Daniel had packed, Elena allowed herself, for the first time, to truly grieve. She sat in the driver's seat outside the home she had loved, tears streaming down her face, and she mourned not just the marriage, but the version of herself who had trusted so completely, who had given so much without question. She mourned the future she had imagined, the family she had hoped to build, the partnership she had believed was unbreakable. But even in her grief, something else was beginning to take shape, a resolve, a quiet promise to herself that this devastating chapter would not be the end of her story. It would be, though she could not yet know how difficult the path ahead would be, the beginning of something entirely new. As she drove away from the house that no longer felt like home, Elena glanced once in the rearview mirror at the life she was leaving behind. Somewhere inside her, beneath the pain, a small voice reminded her that she was still standing, battered, betrayed, and heartbroken, but standing. And that, she realized, would have to be enough for now. The following weeks tested Elena in ways she never imagined possible. Staying at her sister Claire's small apartment meant sleeping on a pull-out couch, surrounded by boxes that represented everything she had lost. Claire was kind, patient, and endlessly supportive, but Elena could see the worry etched into her sister's face every time she looked at her, the concern of someone watching a person they loved crumble slowly, piece by piece. Elena tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She still had her small design consultancy, the business she had built on the side over the past few years, something Daniel had always dismissed as a hobby rather than a real career. Clients still called, projects still needed attention, but Elena found it nearly impossible to concentrate. She would sit at her laptop, staring at blueprints and color palettes, her mind drifting back to Daniel, to Priya, to the baby that would soon exist, as a permanent reminder of everything that had gone wrong. She learned, through mutual friends who felt obligated to share the news, that Daniel had moved Priya into an apartment near his office. The speed of it stunned her. It was as though he had been waiting for the affair to be discovered, as though he had already prepared his exit and simply needed Elena to provide the excuse. Worse still, word began to spread among their social circle. Elena noticed the subtle shift in how people treated her. Some friends grew distant, uncertain how to navigate the awkwardness of choosing sides. Others offered sympathy that felt more like pity, their voices dripping with a concern that somehow made Elena feel smaller rather than supported. She began declining invitations, avoiding gatherings where she knew Daniel's name, or worse, Priya's name, might come up in conversation. One afternoon, while picking up groceries, Elena ran into Monica, a woman she had considered a close friend for years. someone who had attended her wedding, who had celebrated countless holidays with her and Daniel. Monica's expression shifted the moment she saw Elena, an uncomfortable mixture of sympathy and something else, something Elena could not quite place until Monica spoke. "I heard about everything," Monica said, her voice hushed as though discussing something scandalous. "Daniel told us Priya is due in a few months. He seems really happy, actually." The words hit Elena like a slap. Happy. Daniel was happy, while she was sleeping on her sister's couch, trying to piece her shattered life back together. She managed a tight smile, mumbled something about needing to finish her shopping, and walked away before the tears threatening to fall could betray her in public. That evening, Elena sat on Claire's balcony, staring out at the city lights, replaying Monica's words over and over. Daniel was happy. He had moved on so completely, so effortlessly, as though 9 years of marriage had been nothing more than a placeholder for the life he truly wanted. Claire joined her outside, wrapping a blanket around Elena's shoulders and sitting beside her in comfortable silence for several minutes before speaking. "You know this isn't your fault, right?" Claire said gently. "None of this reflects on you. It reflects on him." Elena shook her head slowly. "I keep trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done differently." "Elena, listen to me." Claire took her sister's hand firmly. "Daniel made choices. He chose to lie. He chose to build a secret relationship. He chose to end your marriage the way he did, humiliating you in the process. None of that is something you caused. You were a good wife. You were loyal, supportive, everything a partner should be. His actions are a reflection of his character, not yours." Elena wanted desperately to believe her sister's words, but the pain sitting heavy in her chest made it difficult to accept comfort, even from someone who loved her unconditionally. Still, she held on to Claire's words, storing them somewhere deep inside, hoping that someday they would feel true, rather than simply kind. As the weeks turned into a month, Elena's situation grew increasingly precarious. Daniel had stopped responding to her messages about finalizing details of their separation, leaving her financially uncertain and legally unprotected. She reached out to a lawyer, a stern but compassionate woman named Grace Hollis, who helped her understand her rights and begin the process of formal divorce proceedings. "He can't just push you out and expect no consequences," Grace explained during their first meeting. "You have rights to marital assets, to the home, to fair compensation for the years you invested in this marriage. We're going to make sure he understands that." Elena appreciated Grace's directness, her refusal to let Elena settle for less than what she deserved. But even with legal support, the emotional toll of the process weighed heavily on her. Every document, every negotiation, every conversation about splitting a life into pieces reminded her of everything she was losing. Then came the day Elena had been dreading most. Daniel requested a meeting to discuss the house, insisting it needed to happen in person rather than through lawyers. Against Grace's advice, Elena agreed, still holding on to some small hope that perhaps, face to face, Daniel might show some remorse, some acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. She should have known better. Daniel arrived at the coffee shop looking well rested, dressed in clothes Elena did not recognize, clothes that seemed chosen by someone else's taste. He ordered his coffee without hesitation, sat across from her with an ease that felt almost insulting given the circumstances, and launched immediately into practical matters. "I think it makes sense for me to keep the house," he said, as though discussing a minor logistical detail, rather than the home Elena had poured years of love and effort into building. "Priya and I will need the space once the baby comes." Elena felt her carefully maintained composure begin to slip. "That house is half mine, Daniel. I contributed to the mortgage. I decorated every room. I planted the garden in the backyard." "I know," he said, not unkindly, but without any real understanding of the wound he was reopening. "I'll buy out your share. We can have it appraised, and I'll pay you fairly for your portion." "Fairly," Elena repeated bitterly. "Is that the word you're using now?" Daniel sighed, the sound of a man growing impatient with emotions he considered inconvenient. "Elena, I know this is hard, but we need to be adults about this. Dragging it out, making it messier than it needs to be, that doesn't help either of us." "You don't get to lecture me about being an adult," Elena said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "You cheated on me for over a year. You got another woman pregnant while we were still married. You packed my belongings into boxes and pushed me out of my own home, and now you sit here, calmly discussing real estate, as though none of that happened. For the first time since the affair had been revealed, something flickered across Daniel's face that resembled genuine discomfort. He looked down at his coffee cup, avoiding her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you like this," he said quietly. "Things just happened. I didn't plan for it to go this far." "But it did," Elena said. "And now you have to live with the consequences, just like I do." They sat in tense silence for several moments before Daniel spoke again, his voice softer now, though Elena no longer trusted the sincerity behind it. "I do care about you, Elena. I hope you know that. This isn't about you not being enough. It's just, things changed. I changed." Elena studied his face, searching for the man she had once loved so completely, and found only a stranger wearing his familiar features. "I hope you find happiness, Daniel," she said finally. "I truly do. But I need you to understand something. I am not the same woman you left in that hallway weeks ago. I am not going to disappear quietly or accept whatever scraps of fairness you decide to offer me. I am going to fight for what is rightfully mine, and I am going to rebuild my life, with or without your approval." Something in her tone must have surprised him, because Daniel looked at her with an expression she had not seen since their earliest days together, a flicker of respect, perhaps even a hint of the admiration that had once drawn him to her. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the practical mask he had worn throughout their conversation. "Let's have our lawyers work out the details," he said, standing to leave. "I hope, eventually, we can be civil with each other." Elena watched him walk away, out of the coffee shop, and into the parking lot, disappearing into the life he had built without her. She remained seated for a long while afterward, processing the conversation, feeling a strange mixture of heartbreak and clarity settling within her. The house, the years, the future she had once envisioned, all of it was gone, dissolved by choices that were never hers to make. But sitting there, in the quiet aftermath of that painful meeting, Elena realized something important. Daniel might have taken her home, her sense of security, even her trust in love itself, but he could not take her strength, her resilience, or her determination to build something new from the wreckage he had left behind. She finished her coffee, gathered her things, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, ready, for the first time in weeks, to begin thinking not about what she had lost, but about what she might still become. The photograph arrived by mail on a rainy Tuesday morning, tucked inside an envelope with no return address. Elena almost threw it away without opening it, assuming it was another piece of junk mail cluttering Claire's small mailbox. Something about the handwriting made her pause, though, a careful, deliberate script that felt oddly familiar. She tore it open standing in the hallway, and her breath caught the instant she saw what was inside. It was a picture of Daniel and Priya at what appeared to be a baby shower, surrounded by balloons and smiling guests, many of whom Elena recognized as people from her own former social circle. On the back, someone had written a single sentence, in small, careful letters. "Thought you should see what he's celebrating now." Elena stood frozen, staring at the image, at Daniel's beaming face, at Priya's rounded belly, at the joy radiating from every person in the photograph. She did not know who had sent it, whether it was meant as cruelty or as some misguided attempt at honesty, but the effect was the same either way. It felt like being struck all over again, a fresh wound layered atop one that had barely begun to heal. She sat down heavily on Claire's living room floor, the photograph still clutched in her hand, and allowed herself to cry in a way she had not permitted since the earliest days after discovering the affair. The tears came in waves, uncontrollable, exhausting, until she felt emptied out entirely, hollow and raw. Claire found her there an hour later, still sitting on the floor, the photograph now creased from being held too tightly. Without a word, Claire sat down beside her sister and wrapped her arms around her, holding her while the last of the tears subsided into quiet, shuddering breaths. "They sent it to hurt me," Elena finally whispered. "Someone wanted me to see this. Or someone wanted you to know the truth so you'd stop hoping for something that isn't coming back," Claire offered gently. "Either way, sweetheart, you can't keep letting this photograph, or anything else about their life, decide how you feel about yourself." Elena knew her sister was right, even as the pain made the wisdom difficult to accept. She looked down at the photograph again, studying Daniel's expression, searching for some trace of the guilt he should have carried, some shadow of remorse for the family he had broken to build this new one. She found none. He looked entirely at peace, entirely content, as though Elena and their 9 years together had simply never existed. That night, unable to sleep, Elena found herself scrolling through old photographs on her own phone, images from her marriage that she had not yet found the strength to delete. Wedding photographs, vacation pictures, small candid moments of everyday happiness that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. She lingered on a picture from their 5th anniversary, Daniel's arm wrapped around her waist, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. She tried to remember what had made them laugh that day, tried to recall the feeling of believing, without doubt, that this man loved her completely. The memory felt distant now, almost unreachable, as though it belonged to a different Elena entirely. The divorce proceedings continued to move forward, slow and grinding, each meeting with lawyers and mediators peeling back another layer of the life she had built with Daniel. Grace Hollis proved to be a steady presence throughout, patiently explaining legal terms, negotiating firmly on Elena's behalf, and occasionally offering words of encouragement that helped Elena remember she was more than the sum of her current circumstances. "You're handling this with more grace than most people I represent," Grace told her during one particularly difficult session, after Daniel's attorney had attempted to minimize Elena's contributions to their shared finances. "Don't let anyone make you feel small for demanding what you're owed." Elena appreciated the sentiment, though some days it felt impossible to feel anything other than small. Financially, she found herself in a precarious position. Her design consultancy had provided supplemental income during her marriage, but it had never been enough to support her independently, especially while covering legal fees and searching for permanent housing. She began taking on additional clients, working longer hours than she ever had before, determined to build financial independence, even as exhaustion crept into every part of her life. One evening, after a particularly draining meeting with Daniel's attorney regarding the division of retirement accounts, Elena drove to the neighborhood where she and Daniel had once lived, unable to resist the pull of nostalgia, despite knowing it would only bring more pain. She parked across the street from their former home and stared at the house, now illuminated with warm light from inside, evidence of the new life being built within its walls. Through the front window, she could see movement, shapes that might have been Daniel and Priya, though she could not make out details from that distance. She sat there for nearly 20 minutes, watching a life continue without her, feeling the sharp ache of exclusion, of having been erased from a story she had helped write for 9 years. Eventually, she forced herself to drive away, understanding, even through her grief, that watching from the shadows would never bring her peace. If anything, it only deepened the wound, kept her tethered to a past that no longer included her, that had moved forward without hesitation or apparent difficulty. Back at Claire's apartment, Elena found her sister waiting up, concern etched into her expression. "Where were you?" Claire asked. "You said you'd be back hours ago." Elena hesitated, embarrassed by her own behavior, but ultimately decided honesty was more valuable than pride. "I drove by the house," she admitted. "I don't know why. I just needed to see it." Claire's expression softened with understanding, rather than judgment. "That's normal, Elena. Grief doesn't follow a straight line, but you have to be careful not to let it become a habit. Watching his life continue isn't going to help you build yours." "I know," Elena said quietly. I keep waiting to feel like myself again. Like the woman I used to be before all of this happened." Claire took her sister's hands, her expression gentle but firm. "You're not going to feel like that woman again, Elena, because that woman doesn't exist anymore. What you're going to become is someone new, someone shaped by everything you're surviving right now. And I promise you, that person is going to be stronger than you can imagine." Elena wanted to believe her sister's words, but the path forward still felt impossibly uncertain, shrouded in grief and financial anxiety, and the daily challenge of simply getting through each hour without breaking down entirely. The following week brought an unexpected development. During a routine mediation session, Daniel's attorney presented documentation suggesting Daniel wished to expedite the divorce proceedings, offering a more generous financial settlement than initially proposed. Grace explained privately to Elena that this shift likely reflected Daniel's desire to marry Priya before their child was born, eager to present a united family image rather than remain entangled in a lengthy, contentious divorce. The realization stung more than Elena expected. Daniel was rushing to build his new family, eager to move past the inconvenience of their shared history as quickly as possible, while Elena remained trapped in the painstaking process of untangling 9 years of intertwined life. "Should I fight the timeline?" Elena asked Grace, uncertain whether accepting the accelerated schedule meant capitulating too easily. Grace considered the question carefully. "The settlement he's offering is fair, possibly even generous, likely because he wants this finished quickly. My advice is to take it. Dragging this out further will only prolong your pain without necessarily improving your outcome. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is close a chapter cleanly, even if it feels like conceding something." Elena trusted Grace's judgment, and after careful consideration, agreed to move forward with finalizing the divorce. The decision brought a strange mixture of relief and renewed grief. The practical closure of the marriage, colliding with the emotional reality that this truly was the end of the life she had once imagined for herself. Signing the final paperwork felt surreal, almost anticlimactic after months of emotional turmoil. Elena sat across from Grace in a small conference room, pen in hand, staring at documents that would legally sever her connection to Daniel forever. She thought of their wedding day, the promises exchanged, the future they had planned together. None of it had prepared her for this moment, for the quiet, bureaucratic finality of signing away a marriage that had once felt permanent. "You okay?" Grace asked gently, noticing Elena's hesitation. Elena nodded slowly, though tears blurred her vision as she signed her name on the final line. "I think so," she said. "It just doesn't feel real yet." "It will," Grace assured her. "And when it does, you're going to realize this is actually the beginning of something better, even if it doesn't feel that way right now." Elena wanted desperately to believe her, though the future still felt frighteningly uncertain. She left the lawyer's office that afternoon officially divorced, carrying a folder of documents that represented both an ending and, though she could not yet fully see it, the fragile beginning of a new chapter in her life. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it hesitantly, uncertain what to expect after the emotional weight of the day. It was from a woman named Sophie, someone Elena vaguely remembered from a design conference years earlier, congratulating her on a project featured recently in a regional home magazine, one of the last pieces of work Elena had completed before her world fell apart. The message was small, insignificant in the grand scheme of everything Elena was navigating, but it planted a tiny seed of possibility. Perhaps, despite everything, her professional life still held value, still offered a path forward independent of the marriage that had just legally ended. That evening, sitting alone in Claire's guest room, Elena opened her laptop and began sketching ideas for a project she had been hesitant to pursue for months, a boutique interior design studio, entirely her own, separate from the freelance consultancy work she had relied upon during her marriage. The idea felt ambitious, perhaps even reckless given her current financial situation, but for the first time in weeks, she felt something stirring inside her that resembled genuine excitement rather than merely survival. She stayed awake late into the night, filling pages with concepts, budgets, potential client lists, and business plans. It was not a cure for her grief, not an instant solution to the pain still lodged deep in her chest, but it was something, a direction, a purpose beyond simply enduring each difficult day. Outside, the city continued its steady rhythm, indifferent to the personal storms unfolding within its borders. Somewhere across town, Daniel and Priya were likely preparing for the arrival of their child, building a life together with the same certainty Elena had once felt about her own marriage. But here, in this small room, surrounded by scattered papers and half-formed plans, Elena Marsh was quietly, determinedly, beginning to build something entirely her own. The road ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges she could not yet foresee. But as she finally closed her laptop and prepared for sleep, Elena felt something she had not experienced in months, a fragile but undeniable sense of hope, flickering steadily like a candle refusing to be extinguished by even the harshest wind. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Elena found herself living in a small apartment of her own, a modest one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a converted brick building near the edge of the city. It was nothing like the home she had shared with Daniel, smaller, plainer, filled with second-hand furniture she had gathered piece by piece from thrift stores and online listings. But it was hers, entirely hers, and there was a strange comfort in that fact, even amid the ongoing difficulty of rebuilding her life from nearly nothing. The isolation, however, weighed on her more than she had anticipated. Claire lived across town, busy with her own family and responsibilities, unable to provide the constant support she had offered during the initial weeks of the crisis. Many of Elena's former friends had drifted away entirely, uncomfortable with the awkwardness of choosing sides, or perhaps simply uninterested in maintaining a friendship that no longer connected to Daniel's more prominent social circle. Elena spent long evenings alone, working on her fledgling design business, eating simple meals standing at her kitchen counter, and battling waves of loneliness that seemed to intensify with each passing week. She began to notice troubling patterns in her own thinking, a tendency to replay conversations with Daniel obsessively, searching for hidden meanings, wondering what she might have said or done differently to prevent the collapse of her marriage. One particularly difficult evening, after a client meeting had gone poorly and a potential contract fell through, Elena found herself sitting on her apartment floor, surrounded by unopened mail and unfinished paperwork, overwhelmed by a sense of failure so profound it felt physically crushing. She thought about the life she had once had, the security, the companionship, even the illusion of happiness that Daniel had provided before everything unraveled. For a brief, frightening moment, she wondered if perhaps she had made a mistake, insisting on independence rather than fighting harder to salvage the marriage, however broken it had become. It was in this low moment that her phone rang, the screen displaying an unfamiliar number. Elena almost let it go to voicemail, too exhausted to engage with anyone, but something compelled her to answer. "Elena Marsh?" A warm, unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes, this is she. My name is Nathan Ellery. I got your number from Sophie Whitfield. She mentioned your design work, and I have to say, the project she showed me was stunning. I'm renovating a small boutique hotel downtown, and I think your aesthetic might be exactly what I'm looking for." Elena sat up straighter, momentarily forgetting the despair that had consumed her only minutes earlier. A boutique hotel renovation was precisely the kind of significant project she needed to establish credibility for her new business, an opportunity that could change everything, if she handled it well. "I'd love to hear more about the project," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. They spoke for nearly an hour, discussing vision, budget, timeline, and creative direction. Nathan proved to be thoughtful and genuinely interested in her ideas, offering the kind of professional respect Elena had almost forgotten she deserved. By the time the call ended, Elena felt something she had not experienced in months, a genuine spark of excitement about her future, a reminder that her talents and value existed independent of her failed marriage. The hotel project became a turning point, though not without significant challenges along the way. Elena poured herself into the work, spending long hours researching materials, sketching layouts, and meeting with contractors to bring her vision to life. The physical and mental engagement provided a welcome distraction from her grief, though the emotional wounds from her divorce remained present beneath the surface, occasionally resurfacing during quiet moments alone. She also began attending a small support group for individuals navigating divorce and infidelity, initially reluctant but eventually grateful for the connection it provided. Hearing other people's stories, understanding she was not alone in her pain, helped Elena process her experience in ways that isolated grief had not allowed. She met a woman named Priscilla, though everyone called her Percy, who had endured a strikingly similar betrayal years earlier and had since rebuilt a thriving career and fulfilling life entirely on her own terms. "The first year is the hardest," Percy told her during one particularly candid conversation after a group session. "You feel like you're drowning most days, but eventually, you realize you're not drowning anymore. You're actually learning how to swim in water you never expected to be thrown into." Elena held on to those words during the difficult months that followed, using them as a kind of anchor whenever grief threatened to overwhelm her progress. Slowly, gradually, she began noticing small shifts within herself. She slept through entire nights without waking in tears. She caught herself laughing genuinely during conversations with new friends from her support group. She completed the hotel renovation project to widespread acclaim, earning glowing reviews that brought a steady stream of new clients to her growing business. Meanwhile, though Elena tried to avoid unnecessary information about Daniel's life, occasional updates still reached her through mutual acquaintances or unavoidable social media encounters. She learned that Priya had given birth to a daughter, that Daniel had thrown himself into fatherhood with apparent enthusiasm, that he and Priya had married in a small ceremony shortly after the birth. Each piece of information delivered a fresh, though gradually diminishing, sting of pain. What Elena did not immediately learn, however, was the growing strain beneath the surface of Daniel's seemingly perfect new life. The demands of caring for a newborn, combined with the underlying tension of a relationship built upon betrayal, began creating cracks in the foundation Daniel had so eagerly constructed. Priya, exhausted from sleepless nights and struggling with the isolating challenges of early motherhood, grew increasingly resentful of Daniel's continued long hours at work, hours that mirrored, ironically, the very absences that had once driven him toward the affair in the first place. Arguments became frequent in their household, disagreements about finances, parenting responsibilities, and the underlying trust issues that inevitably arose from a relationship founded on infidelity. Priya, perhaps sensing the fragility of their bond, grew increasingly insecure, questioning Daniel's whereabouts, scrutinizing his phone with the same suspicion he had once inspired in Elena. Daniel, for his part, found himself unexpectedly overwhelmed by the reality of his new life. The fantasy he had constructed during the affair, images of effortless happiness and passionate connection, had not accounted for the mundane, exhausting realities of parenthood, financial pressure, and the slow erosion of romantic intensity that occurs in any long-term relationship. He began, in quiet, unguarded moments, comparing his current circumstances to the stability and comfort he had once shared with Elena, memories he had previously dismissed as boring or unfulfilling, now taking on an unexpected glow of nostalgia. Elena remained blissfully unaware of these developments for many months, focused entirely on her own healing and professional growth. Her design business flourished beyond her initial expectations, earning recognition in local publications, and eventually attracting clients from neighboring cities. She hired an assistant, a bright and enthusiastic young woman named Ivy, who helped manage the growing workload, while Elena focused on creative direction and client relationships. Nearly a year after her divorce was finalized, Elena stood in the newly completed lobby of her second major hotel project, surrounded by industry professionals and journalists gathered for the grand opening celebration. She wore a confident, elegant dress she had purchased for herself, a small but significant symbol of the woman she had become since the devastating collapse of her marriage. As photographers captured images of the stunning space she had designed, Elena felt a profound sense of accomplishment settle over her, a recognition that despite everything she had endured, despite the humiliation and heartbreak Daniel had inflicted upon her, she had not only survived, but had built something entirely her own, something beautiful and successful, that owed nothing to the marriage that had once defined her identity. Later that evening, as she drove home from the celebration, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about the frightened, heartbroken woman who had stood in that hallway nearly a year and a half earlier, staring at messages that shattered her world. That woman felt like a distant memory now, someone she remembered with compassion but no longer recognized as her current self. She had built a new life, one defined not by another person's choices, but by her own resilience, talent, and determination. The pain of Daniel's betrayal remained, in some small way, permanently etched into her history, but it no longer controlled her present or dictated her future. Elena Marsh had, against tremendous odds, become the architect of her own remarkable comeback. Little did she know, the man who had once discarded her so carelessly was about to discover, in the most painful way possible, exactly what he had thrown away. Daniel sat in his car outside a coffee shop he had once frequented years earlier, staring at his phone, scrolling through an article that had appeared unexpectedly in his newsfeed. The headline caught him completely off guard. It featured Elena, radiant and confident, standing in front of a beautifully renovated hotel lobby, being interviewed about her rapidly growing design career. He read the article twice, studying the photograph accompanying it, hardly recognizing the poised, successful woman staring back at him from the screen. This was not the broken, devastated woman he had left behind. This was someone entirely transformed, someone thriving in ways that unsettled him deeply, though he struggled to understand exactly why. At home, things had grown increasingly tense. His daughter, now nearly a year old, brought exhausting demands that left little room for the passionate romance he had once shared with Priya during the early days of their affair. Priya herself had changed significantly since becoming a mother, understandably consumed by the needs of their child, often too tired for meaningful conversation, let alone the intimacy Daniel had once found so intoxicating. Worse still, Priya's insecurity had grown into something almost unbearable. She questioned his every late arrival, examined his phone with suspicious eyes, and frequently accused him of losing interest in their relationship. The irony was not lost on Daniel, though he rarely acknowledged it even to himself. He had built this relationship upon deception, and now he found himself living within a household defined by constant distrust, a direct consequence of choices he had made without fully considering their lasting impact. One evening, after another heated argument with Priya regarding his work hours, Daniel left the apartment and drove aimlessly through the city, his mind heavy with thoughts he had been avoiding for months. He found himself, almost without conscious decision, driving toward the old neighborhood where he and Elena had once lived. He parked outside their former home, now occupied by a different family entirely, and sat quietly, memories flooding back with unexpected intensity. He remembered Elena's laughter, the way she used to hum softly while cooking dinner, the quiet comfort of coming home to someone who genuinely cared about his day. He remembered arguments too, disagreements that now seemed trivial compared to the constant tension defining his current relationship. Mostly, he remembered feeling secure, valued, and deeply loved in a way that felt increasingly distant from his present reality. Daniel drove home that night carrying a weight he could not fully articulate, even to himself. He began, in the following weeks, seeking out information about Elena more actively, following her professional achievements through articles and social media updates, each success story deepening a strange combination of pride and profound regret. He mentioned her name once, carelessly, during a conversation with a mutual friend, Oliver, who had remained close with both Daniel and Elena despite the complicated circumstances of their divorce. "She's doing incredibly well," Oliver said, perhaps unaware of the effect his words would have. "Honestly, man, she seems happier now than I ever remember her being when you two were together." The comment lodged itself in Daniel's mind, refusing to release its grip no matter how hard he tried to focus on his current family responsibilities. He began, almost obsessively, comparing every aspect of his life with Priya to memories of his marriage with Elena, memories that grew increasingly idealized the more dissatisfied he became with his present circumstances. 6 months later, Daniel's marriage to Priya reached a breaking point. Constant arguments, mutual resentment, and the underlying instability created by their relationship's deceptive origins finally proved too much to sustain. Priya, exhausted and increasingly unhappy, initiated a separation, taking their daughter and moving temporarily into her sister's home across the city. Daniel found himself alone for the first time in years, forced to confront the reality of choices he had made without fully considering their consequences. The silence of his apartment, once filled with the chaos of family life, now felt oppressive, a constant reminder of everything he had sacrificed for a relationship that had ultimately crumbled beneath its own weight. It was during this period of isolation and reflection that Daniel made a decision he would later recognize as both inevitable and deeply misguided. He reached out to Elena directly, sending a message that began innocently enough, inquiring about her well-being, congratulating her on her professional success, expressing hope that they might reconnect as friends given enough time. Elena, having built a peaceful, fulfilling life, largely free from Daniel's presence, felt genuine surprise upon receiving his message. She considered ignoring it entirely, uncertain whether engaging with her former husband would prove beneficial or simply reopen wounds she had worked diligently to heal. Ultimately, curiosity and a sense of closure prompted her to respond, though carefully and with clear boundaries firmly established. Their initial exchange remained brief and professional, Daniel congratulating her achievements, Elena offering polite but reserved gratitude. However, Daniel, emboldened by her willingness to respond, began reaching out more frequently, gradually shifting the tone of their conversations toward increasingly personal territory. He mentioned, during one particularly candid message, that his marriage to Priya had ended, that he was struggling with loneliness and regret, that he found himself thinking often about the life they had once shared together. Elena read his messages with a complicated mixture of emotions, surprise at his vulnerability, lingering pain from their painful history, and an unexpected clarity regarding exactly how far she had come since the devastating collapse of their marriage. She responded honestly, though with careful restraint. "I'm sorry to hear things didn't work out, Daniel. But I hope you understand. I've built a life I'm genuinely proud of, one that doesn't include revisiting our past." Daniel, however, seemed unwilling to accept such clear boundaries. His messages grew more frequent, more emotionally charged, expressing regret for his past actions, and hinting at a desire to reconcile, to somehow reclaim the relationship he had so carelessly discarded years earlier. Elena found herself increasingly uncomfortable with his persistence, recognizing patterns of manipulation she had once been susceptible to but now clearly identified for what they were. She began limiting her responses, eventually informing Daniel directly that continued communication was neither necessary nor welcomed. Undeterred, Daniel escalated his efforts, appearing unexpectedly at professional events he knew Elena would attend, engineering seemingly coincidental encounters through mutual acquaintances, and repeatedly attempting to convince her that their history together deserved a second chance. During one such encounter, at an industry gathering celebrating local business achievements, Daniel approached Elena directly, his expression carrying a mixture of hope and desperation that Elena found simultaneously familiar and utterly foreign. "You look incredible," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "I've been following everything you've accomplished. I'm so proud of you, Elena." "Thank you," Elena replied evenly, maintaining polite but clear distance. "I appreciate that, but Daniel, I think it's important we're clear about boundaries here." "I know things ended badly between us," Daniel continued, seemingly unable to heed her cautionary tone. "But I've had a lot of time to think about everything, about us, about the mistakes I made. I know I hurt you terribly, but I truly believe we could find our way back to what we once had." Elena studied his face carefully, searching for the man she had once loved so deeply, finding instead someone whose regret seemed rooted more in the loss of comfort and stability than genuine understanding of the pain he had caused her. "Daniel," she said gently but firmly, "I spent months rebuilding myself after you ended our marriage. I forgave myself for trusting you completely, for believing our relationship was solid. I built an entirely new life, one I'm deeply proud of, without your help, without your presence. I'm not interested in revisiting a relationship that caused me so much pain, regardless of how difficult your current circumstances might be." Daniel's expression shifted, disappointment and something resembling desperation crossing his features. "I made a terrible mistake, Elena. I know that now. Please, just give me a chance to prove I've changed." Elena felt a familiar pang of sympathy, an instinct she had spent considerable effort learning to recognize and manage appropriately. She understood Daniel's pain was likely genuine, but she also understood that genuine pain did not obligate her to sacrifice her own hard-won peace and stability. "I hope you find happiness, Daniel," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I truly do. But that happiness isn't something I can provide anymore. I've moved forward, and I need you to respect that." She turned and walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone amid the celebratory atmosphere of the gathering, watching the woman he had once discarded so carelessly walk confidently into a future that no longer included him. That night, Elena drove home reflecting on the encounter, surprised by how little emotional turbulence it had created within her. The woman who had once been shattered by Daniel's betrayal had transformed into someone capable of facing him directly, acknowledging their painful history without allowing it to derail her hard-earned progress. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to his empty apartment, confronting the reality of his choices with newfound clarity. He had spent years chasing an idealized version of happiness, only to discover, too late, that the genuine partnership and stability he truly desired had existed all along with the woman he had so thoughtlessly discarded. As weeks passed into months, Daniel occasionally attempted further contact, though each attempt met with the same calm, unwavering boundaries Elena had established. Eventually, recognizing the futility of his efforts, he ceased reaching out entirely, left instead to navigate the consequences of his choices alone, forced to build a new understanding of himself, separate from both the family he had broken and the marriage he had once carelessly abandoned. Elena, for her part, continued flourishing both personally and professionally. Her design business expanded into neighboring cities, earning national recognition for its innovative approach and distinctive aesthetic. She cultivated deep, meaningful friendships built on mutual respect and genuine connection, eventually finding herself open to new romantic possibilities, though she approached this new chapter with wisdom and caution earned through painful experience. Nearly 2 years after the devastating discovery that had once shattered her entire world, Elena stood once again at a professional gathering, this time as the keynote speaker addressing an audience of aspiring entrepreneurs and business professionals. She spoke candidly about resilience, about rebuilding one's identity after devastating loss, about discovering strength in circumstances that once seemed utterly hopeless. As she looked out over the audience, applause rising in appreciation of her journey, Elena felt a profound sense of peace settle within her, a recognition that she had not merely survived Daniel's betrayal, but had emerged from it entirely transformed, stronger, wiser, and more genuinely herself than she had ever been during their marriage. She thought briefly of Daniel, wondering where his own journey had led him, but the thought carried no lingering pain, no unresolved longing. It existed simply as a memory of a painful chapter that had, against tremendous odds, ultimately led her toward a life far richer and more authentic than anything she had once imagined possible. Elena Marsh had not simply survived humiliation and heartbreak. She had risen from it entirely renewed, a woman who understood, with unshakable certainty, that her worth had never depended upon another person's recognition or presence. She was, at last, fully and completely her own person, a queen who required no one's permission to reclaim her throne, and no one's chase to remind her of exactly how far she had come.